In question letter D, we can definitely do this problem a variety of ways. One way we can do it is essentially to just keep going, keep multiplying by 1.20, 1.20, 1.20, 1.20, 1.20 until we get to midnight, and then see whatever the answer is at that spot. If you have a calculator, that will work. You can see that I just started multiplying, and if you have a calculator like this where it copies and pastes your answer, you can just keep pressing enter a whole bunch of times and it can keep doing all of the numbers that you want. The only problem is you have to keep track. Like I just pressed it a bunch of times and I have no idea how many times, so I don't know if this is midnight, if this is like past midnight, I have no clue. I pressed it too many times and I wasn't counting. So if you're going to do that method, you just have to count and be careful if you're going to do it that way. If you want to use the equation another way, here's an option. Remember how n is like the number of hours that have been spent looking at this bacteria? So n always is like the top row of the table. T of n is always like the bottom row. If n is the number of hours, then what I could do is just plug in a number for n that represents midnight, and I could see if that works. Here's the only problem. N is the number of hours since we began paying attention to the bacteria, and we started at 10 a.m. So at 10 a.m., n wasn't 10, n was 0. At 11 a.m., this exponent wouldn't be 11, it was 1, because it was 1 hour from the starting point. It was 1 hour since we started. So if I want to use this equation, which is fine, I need to figure out what's the n value at midnight, 12 a.m. So I'd have to think, what if the table continued? So I made on my scratch paper here a continuation of the table. If the table was at n value 6 at 4 p.m., then that means n value 7 is at 5 p.m., n value 8 is at 6 p.m., but I need to get all the way to midnight, which is 12 a.m. So if I keep counting more n values, I'd have n value 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It looks like the n value would be 14 by the time I finally hit midnight. Now I'm not going to figure out what all these numbers are, but I could. If you wanted to just keep going, this tells you how many multiplications you need to do until you get to midnight. But you could also be efficient and say, okay, well, at midnight, the n value would be 14 hours later. So I could type into my calculator the equation with 14 plugged in. I could type 100 times 1.20 to the power of 14. And that number, 1283.92, must be the exact number of bacteria that I was looking for. Now, again, if you wanted to extend the table and just do a whole bunch of multiplications, now you know it would take 14 multiplications to do it. But that's why the equation kind of makes sense. Because if I'm going to do 1.2 times 1.2 times 1.2 times 1.2 14 times, that's what the exponent of power 14 means. So it kind of makes sense that the equation does do this in a more efficient way. We just had to know how many multiplications we had to tell it to do. We had to do 14 multiplications. And to do that, we just had to kind of figure that out with common sense. But the calculator did all the heavy lifting for us, so we didn't actually have to multiply 14 individual times. Now, to be fair, question letter E is kind of tricky. Question letter E is the kind of question that would involve a little bit of guess and check. And eventually we're going to learn a fancy way of doing question letter E, but for now, you don't really need to do that question. Right now, it's a backwards thinking type question that may indeed be too challenging, especially if you don't have a very good calculator. It can be easier to do a question like this with a graphing calculator, and if we were in class normally, I would have you on a graphing calculator trying to figure this question out. But since we don't all have access to such things at home, I'm going to say for now, let's just skip a question like this, because without the proper tools, I think that question will be more frustrating than it needs to be. With that said, hopefully now you've gotten a good sense of how to do these problems more efficiently. If you can do question number 7 without watching the last set of videos, I would say try to do it on your own. If now you've gotten the idea and you have a calculator handy, I think you can do question number 7 without any trouble. Now, generally speaking, in question number 7, I'm also going to have you skip question letter D. So that's why it might be relatively easy for you to do this question on your own, because D would be the hardest question, and I'm not going to have you do it, because again, it's a graphing calculator problem. So, if you can, try question number 7. If you feel like you need a little bit more help, there will be one more video in this playlist that you can watch if you need it.